There's a certain power in suburbia. It's not loud, and it doesn't wear a badge. It wears a linen polo and wields a clipboard. When the HOA told me to take down the pink flamingo I'd planted after my wife died, I didn't argue. I smiled and nodded. Then I quietly began dismantling the empire they thought they controlled. This is the story of Leonard the Flamingo, betrayal, spreadsheets, and baked goods, and of how one very underestimated man got his damn lawn back. Some people collect stamps while others bowl. I bury flamingos. Not actual flamingos, mind you. That would be strange, even for this neighborhood. No, I'm talking about Leonard, 3 feet tall, pink plastic, and the last gift my wife ever gave me before she passed. She bought him as a joke, but I kept him because he made me laugh when nothing else did. I placed Leonard in the front yard on a Thursday, and by Friday morning, I had 2 typed letters on my doorstep, one anonymous but printed on HOA stationery, citing bylaw 4.3b, no lawn ornaments of garish coloration or whimsical character. I hadn't known whimsy was apparently such a threat to property values. And then came Gerald. Gerald Hemsworth III, to be precise, president of the Homeowners Association, tan year-round in a way no Canadian man should be, with unnaturally white teeth and a Rolex that ticked louder than his brain. He wore linen shirts like armor and used the word optics more than anyone not working in politics ever should. I'm not a judgmental man, but I disliked Gerald from the first moment his pearly whites almost blinded me. Gerald didn't knock. He just stood in my driveway with his arms crossed, waiting until I noticed him through the blinds. "Mr. Bloom," he called as I opened the door. "There's been a complaint." "There always is," I replied. "What's the subject this week? My mailbox font?" He didn't laugh. Gerald never laughed. He just pointed a manicured finger toward Leonard. "I'm afraid that isn't in compliance. Lawn decor must adhere to community standards, which consist of neutral colors and non-distracting silhouettes." "You were at the meeting." "I was," I said. "As I recall, you spoke for 42 minutes about decorative mulch. I didn't tell him that those in attendance, those with any sense, checked out of his soliloquy within the first 30 seconds. And yet, the vote was clear. Gerald gave me a look he reserved for non-compliant dogs. "We'll need that thing removed by the end of the day." Leonard stood beside my hydrangeas, cheerful and unrepentant. He had on a pair of novelty sunglasses and a chipped beak, which gave him character. I looked at him, then back at Gerald. "Understood," I said. Gerald blinked, as if surprised I didn't put up a fight. He gave me a stiff nod and strutted back to his hybrid SUV. I watched his brake lights disappear around the cul-de-sac curve before turning back to Leonard. "Sorry, old friend," I murmured. "It looks like your freedom was short-lived." I didn't protest or write letters, and I didn't attend the emergency bylaw review meeting he'd scheduled just to cement Leonard's exile. No, I removed the flamingo quietly and with dignity. Leonard's new resting place was a small hole beside the hedge, placed there like a fallen soldier, head poking slightly above the soil, his beak tilted at just the right tragic angle. The soil was cold and damp against my palms, clinging under my fingernails as I patted it down. It felt heavier than it should have. Later that night, I stood by the window, sipping decaf and staring at the darkened lawn, an icy determination settling in my breast. I had buried my wife, my dog, and my pride in this neighborhood, but I would not bury my flamingo. The next week, I began attending HOA meetings again, not out of protest, but observation. I brought oatmeal raisin cookies and passed them around to my neighbors, just enough to seem harmless. The meetings were always held in Gerald's garage. It was a place to store cars and protect them from the weather, but Gerald, pretentious git that he was, called it the annex. It had a mini fridge, an overhead projector, and a faint smell of citronella and stale coffee, the kind of smell that lingered in your clothes long after you left. We sat in metal folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around Gerald's throne, a high-backed swivel office chair with lumbar support and his initials monogrammed on a cushion. Most residents came out of obligation or the desire to watch a train wreck in slow motion. I came with a notebook and a Sharpie. Gerald would never know what hit him. Gerald ran the meetings like a man auditioning for a city council he'd never be elected to. He opened with long-winded monologues about aesthetic cohesion and upholding the integrity of our community brand. A few neighbors shifted in their folding chairs, eyes glazed, one man discreetly checking his watch under the table. When one woman tried to ask if her son could put up a basketball hoop, Gerald said it would disrupt the architectural harmony. The child was 8. I suspect his concern was his desire to play basketball, not make the neighborhood into a postmodernist eyesore with regulation backboards. Over the next few weeks, I watched and scribbled. I learned to nod when spoken to and smile when not. When I was at home, I watered roses, pulled weeds, and listened while people gossiped. It was in the community garden, plot number 12, tomatoes and peonies, that the first seed bloomed. The air was warm and humid, rich with the smell of turned soil and tomato vines. Gerald's got 3 new palm trees going in, Mrs. Elkins murmured one afternoon, wiping her brow with a gloved hand. Apparently, they're a water-smart species. The problem is they'll cost the HOA $6,000. Interesting, I said, adjusting my hearing aid for effect. Where's the receipt? Mrs. Elkins shrugged. Ask the board. So I did. At the next meeting, I asked in my politest tone if I could see the landscaping invoices. Gerald chuckled. Of course, Mr. Bloom. Full transparency. You'll find them somewhere in last month's minutes. I thanked him. Then I pulled the minutes and found nothing but a vague line item. Seasonal improvements. $14,280. Curious, I said. That's a lot of season. Gerald didn't respond. He just smiled that taut, teeth-baring smile and moved to the next item. Sensing something amiss, I started digging. Public records showed that our landscaping contractor, GH3 Exterior Concepts, had been awarded every outdoor maintenance project in the last 2 years. GH3, Gerald Hemsworth III. That was about as subtle as a neon flamingo. The audacity of naming his company after himself would have been funny if it hadn't been so shameless. It got better. The treasurer of the HOA was Gerald's sister-in-law, Teresa. Teresa was a fine-looking woman who was not blind to her appeal. She always wore pearls and rarely spoke, but signed every check with a flourish that matched her nail polish. And 2 board members, Doug and Kendra, well, I had my suspicions. Let's just say they spent more time reviewing easements than anyone needed. One night I saw Doug's car leave Kendra's driveway at 1:47 a.m. If anyone asked, I wasn't spying, I was trimming my hedge. The binoculars were there for safety. The longer I listened, the louder the truth became. I was Arthur Bloom, retired, widowed, and invisible. People say more when they think you aren't listening, and it's amazing what people will admit when you water their peonies and pretend to be deaf. The first rule of neighborhood espionage is simple. Never look like you're doing it, which is why I wore khakis, carried a clipboard, and started referring to myself as the interim mulch coordinator. No one asked what that meant. They nodded and assumed I had a spreadsheet somewhere. The truth was I had 3. One tracked HOA budget line items, another listed resident grievances, time-stamped and categorized, and the third, my favorite, was labeled loose threads. It began with Teresa, the treasurer, or as I now referred to her in my notes, the Pearl. She had a weakness for Prosecco and a tendency to leave her car unlocked during board meetings. One Tuesday night, while returning a casserole dish to her porch, I may have tripped and, while recovering my dignity, noticed an open file folder on the passenger seat with HOA checks bearing her signature, all made out to GH3 Exterior Concepts. The faint smell of leather and old coffee drifted from the cracked car window as I leaned just close enough to glimpse the signatures. And then there were the rendezvous. Doug and Kendra had perfected the art of plausible deniability. They carpooled to reduce our carbon footprint. They held off-site discussions at a smoothie bar 20 minutes away. And once, Kendra emerged from Doug's back door wearing mismatched shoes. When I waved from my front porch, she froze like a deer caught borrowing its neighbor's husband. In all fairness, the shoes looked comfortable. I compiled everything: payment records, board connections, even a few photos, taken with a long lens but only in daylight, and only when the subjects were facing public property. I have my limits. It was during one of these stakeouts, seated on a folding lawn chair behind my bird bath, that Gerald himself wandered into view. He was wearing a Bluetooth headset and arguing with someone over a landscaping permit. I heard the words kickback, ungrateful jackals, and interestingly, they can't prove a damn thing. Well, that's interesting. I didn't have proof yet, but I did have a plan. It started with a trip to Staples, a blank thumb drive, and a little folder I titled HOA Expenses Confidential. All capital letters. The illusion of scandal is 90% formatting. I filled it with publicly sourced documents, things anyone could find if they were bored and had a pathological need for justice. But I arranged them just so. Payments to GH3, addresses of all board members, dates of questionable meetings, and one aerial shot of Gerald's mysterious new backyard pergola that wasn't in the approved renovation log. The Sharpie squeaked on the plastic as I labeled the drive in thick black marker, the letters bold and unmistakable, then popped it in a Ziploc and dropped it into the mailbox of one Beverly Kwan. My hand was steady, but my pulse wasn't. Beverly was a former paralegal, three-time bocce champion, and the human equivalent of a smoke alarm that never runs out of batteries. By nightfall, she'd posted the folder in the community Facebook group with the caption, "Something smells funny, and it's not the compost pile." By midnight, my phone buzzed so often with notifications from neighbors that I had to bury it under a pillow just to sleep. By morning, she'd forwarded it to the city inspector, and by lunch, she'd texted me, "We need to talk. Bring cookies." Paranoia bloomed. Doug asked if anyone else had received strange calls, and Kendra stopped parking in front of Doug's house. Teresa developed a sudden, aggressive interest in shredding paper. And Gerald? Gerald looked like a man who had just realized the pitchforks were real and the mob brought lemon bars. But we were just getting started. If you ever want to watch a suburban community implode, don't yell fire, just whisper audit. The morning after Beverly's post, the Facebook group exploded like a flaming casserole. The red notification counter climbed into the triple digits, each ping a reminder that the neighborhood had woken up hungry for answers. The comments were a masterpiece of implication. Does anyone know what GH3 stands for? Asking for transparency. I heard someone's relative got all the lawn contracts. Anyone else hear that? Not trying to start drama, but why is our HOA fee higher than the next neighborhood over? And our trash cans don't even match. Gerald tried to post a response, something long, rambling, and full of phrases like unfounded allegations, operating within the bylaws, and selective misunderstanding of routine disbursements. It had the tone of a man who just realized the villagers don't need torches when they have a group meet. Meanwhile, I took a stroll. It's important when staging a public reckoning to look like you're engaged in nothing more than enjoying your azaleas. I nodded at neighbors, watered my sidewalk strip, and offered cookies to the mail carrier, who was now delivering more brown envelopes with government seals than usual. That was step one. Step two required a bit more flair. I wrote a letter, not a threatening letter. No, nothing so crude. Just a tasteful anonymous note sent to our local investigative news outlet, the County Clarion. I included a summary of potential mismanagement, a list of contracts, and a politely phrased suggestion that the HOA president might benefit from sunlight and scrutiny. Then I sent another packet, this one to the IRS. I included copies of Gerald's contractor payments, a few calendar overlaps between his vacations and landscaping invoices, and a highlighted line that read, Board President Gerald Hemsworth III recused himself from voting, but still signed the check. Meanwhile, I made banana bread, more oatmeal cookies, and enough casserole to feed a small army. Doug passed me on the sidewalk later that afternoon, eyes darting like a raccoon in a dog park. When he saw me, I thought he would pass out, but he denied me the amusement, instead settling into nonchalance. "Hey, Arthur," he said, "crazy stuff online, huh?" I smiled. "Yes, seems like folks are very engaged lately." Kendra, on the other hand, stopped waving at me entirely. Teresa canceled the treasurer's coffee hour and was spotted buying a cross-cut shredder the size of a filing cabinet. "I wonder what that's for," I mused to Beverly and Mrs. Arbuckle, the neighborhood gossip. I had a fond spot in my heart for Mrs. Arbuckle, though she was far too flighty to take the place of my dearly departed wife, and she was at least 15 years older than me. Gerald didn't appear in public for 2 days. When he resurfaced, he announced an emergency strategy session at his house, limited to board members only. I made sure to stand within earshot while deadheading my roses. Through the half-open window, I could smell Gerald's cologne, too strong, too sharp, as he tried to hold his crumbling empire together. They whispered, they argued, and they said things like, "It's got to be Bloom. He's got time on his hands. And no proof it's him." And my favorite, "Why would a man that age care about a flamingo?" They still hadn't learned. It was never about the flamingo. It was about what the flamingo represented. They'd stripped the color from the neighborhood. I was merely painting it back. One document, one rumor, one pastry at a time. Because I've always believed revenge should be served with cookies. Everyone brings something to the table. By the time the audit letter arrived, Gerald had already begun sweating through his linen. It came in a plain white envelope, no warning, no logo, just a return address from a nonprofit called Civic Integrity First. The envelope was thin but stiff, the kind of mail that made your palms itch as soon as you held it. Their website boasted an eagle, a gavel, and a tagline. Because power should be earned, not installed by your brother-in-law. I had discovered them through a gardening forum. Between composting tips and debates about deer repellent, someone had posted a link. Report shady HOA boards here. I filed the form under the name of an anonymous neighbor, attached the same documents I'd gifted to Beverly, and checked every box marked conflict of interest. It felt cleansing. Meanwhile, I hosted a potluck. Nothing dramatic, just a Thursday night, mismatched patio furniture, citronella candles, and a hand-lettered sign that said Neighborhood Appreciation Night. The air was warm and filled with the smell of grilled bratwursts and fresh-cut grass, the sound of laughter rising over the soft hum of cicadas. Beverly brought hummus, while Kendra RSVP'd maybe, and then didn't show. Gerald drove by slowly, twice. His SUV crept along the curb like a shark circling, the tinted windows hiding a face I could still picture scowling. On the second pass, I waved, but for some reason he didn't respond. Rude. Inside the board, the cracks had deepened. Doug had begun blaming Teresa for the financial records. Teresa had stopped returning calls. Someone accidentally deleted the past year's meeting minutes from the shared Google Drive. And through it all, I remained helpful. I offered to deliver flyers for the upcoming community safety night. I submitted a recommendation for mulch vendors. And I even offered to trim the hedge at the park entrance, which, if you were observant, gave a rather clear sight line into Gerald's new side patio, complete with hot tub and unapproved pergola. The city inspector noticed too. The work had been done without proper documentation, and the fine was sizable. I stood far enough back to watch the exchange, the inspector's clipboard held like a weapon, Gerald shifting from foot to foot in his driveway. Words like permit violations and infractions rained to the ground like confetti. Gerald claimed it was an honest misunderstanding. The inspector didn't bite and handed him a yellow citation and told him to tear it down or submit an architectural review within 10 business days. It was beautiful, but the pièce de résistance was yet to come. Late one night, I slipped another envelope into a downtown mailbox, this one addressed to the County Clarion's tip line. Inside, a brief but juicy summary of HOA drama, a list of contractor payouts, and a thumb drive labeled HOA corruption. You decide. Yes, it was the same thumb drive, though recycled. I'm not made of money. 2 days later, a reporter called Gerald for comment, and just like that, the board unraveled in public. If I've learned anything in my 71 years, it's this. People are calm right up until they realize someone's been listening. The emergency board meeting was on a Wednesday at 6:00 p.m., as though urgency observes business hours. It was the first meeting since the city inspector's visit, since the IRS notice of inquiry letters arrived, and since the County Clarion posted a teaser titled HOA or Personal ATM, a closer look at Maple Glen's luxury landscaping scandal. They used stock footage of squirrels and blurred video of a flamingo. It was not my beloved Leonard, but it was still close enough to sting. I arrived early, folding chair in one hand, lemon bars in the other. The annex, Gerald's garage, was noticeably less polished. The air inside was heavy and stale, carrying the faint odor of spray cleaner and Gerald's cologne, both failing to mask the tension in the room. The folding table wobbled and the projector blinked like it had developed stage fright. Gerald stood at the front, face tight, jaw working like a man chewing aspirin. Doug and Kendra sat on opposite sides of the room. Teresa was absent, reportedly visiting family, which I suspected was code for deleting spreadsheets. Only a handful of residents showed up, enough to witness, but not enough to help. Gerald opened with a cough and a statement. Due to recent misunderstandings, we will conduct an internal review of all vendor relationships. Kendra raised her hand. Define misunderstandings, because if I'm being accused of leaking, Doug cut in, no one accused you, but maybe if certain people hadn't rubber-stamped contracts with their brunch partner's husband. That's rich, coming from someone who invoices the HOA for his own lawn. Gerald slammed a binder shut. Enough! We are not airing personal grievances. This is about optics. Ah, yes, optics. From the back row, I lifted a lemon bar to my lips. It crumbled delicately, just like the meeting. Gerald attempted to redirect the agenda, talked about rebuilding community trust, floated a special subcommittee, even mentioned hosting a town hall transparency night. But it was too late. You could see it in their faces. The whispers had gotten louder than his voice. Doug stood up and walked out, and Kendra followed, slamming the door hard enough to make Gerald flinch. He looked at me then, just briefly. His expression said, "You did this." I offered him a napkin. Lemon bar? Gerald didn't take it. Instead, he sat down in his oversized swivel chair, the one with the lumbar support and faint smell of spray tan, and stared at nothing. The meeting ended with no adjournment, no votes, no minutes, and no order. There was nothing but silence and the crumbs from my lemon bars. The van arrived on a Monday. It was unmarked at first, just a plain white vehicle rolling down the cul-de-sac, slowing as it passed Gerald's house. Curtains shifted in nearby windows as neighbors peeked out, the hum of the van's engine oddly loud in the morning quiet. Then it circled back, parked across from his mailbox, and out stepped a woman in a navy blazer holding a microphone. It was a local reporter I recognized from the Clarion's Scam or Slip-Up segment. She once exposed a taco truck for listing fictional ingredients. I figured Gerald wouldn't stand a chance. I was already on my porch, trimming bonsai for ambiance. Gerald opened the door in pressed slacks and a short-sleeved polo, probably hoping he looked casual. The cameraman adjusted the focus. The reporter smiled like a cobra. Mr. Hemsworth, we're doing a story on local HOA governance. Would you mind answering a few questions? He blinked, then launched into a monologue he'd rehearsed. We welcome transparency at Maple Glen. All decisions are made according to our bylaws and in the best interest of the residents. Interesting, the reporter said. And is it standard for the HOA president to award contracts to a company he owns? Gerald's smile held, but the cracks showed at the edges. I recused myself from all relevant votes. Your name is on the checks. The treasurer handled disbursements. Your sister-in-law. That's coincidental. They went on like that, each answer digging a little deeper. The questions got faster and Gerald started sweating. Eventually, he held up both hands and said, I think this interview is over. But it wasn't, because Beverly, bless her polyester windbreaker, came jogging by just in time and paused, loudly. Oh, are you from the Clarion? Do you want to know about the pergola? Beverly's grin was all teeth and triumph, and for once, Gerald was the one frozen like a deer in headlights. Gerald made a strangled sound. Or the secret board meetings at Kendra's house. We've got screenshots now. The cameraman turned to her like he'd found treasure. Gerald slammed the door. That night, the story aired. It opened with a panning shot of Maple Glen's entry sign and a narrator saying, beneath the hedges and HOA rules, one community uncovers a tangled web of contracts, conflict, and questionable choices. There was footage of Gerald blinking furiously, Beverly gesturing with a folder of documents, and a slow zoom on a blurred-out pink shape in someone's yard. It was my faithful Leonard, immortalized at last. The next morning, Gerald posted a long-winded resignation letter on the HOA website. It used words like smear campaign, character assassination, and my favorite, flagrant disregard for chain of command. Residents responded with a petition to dissolve the board entirely. It passed with 87% in favor. Doug and Kendra each moved out within the month. Teresa claimed she'd always hated this neighborhood and went to stay with her daughter in Kelowna. Gerald, he's still here, but he keeps his head down now. The titan of the neighborhood was now reduced to shuffling down the block rather than power strolls and polos. The pergola came down one Saturday, hauled away in a rented trailer. As for me, I polished Leonard. The flamingo would rise again. There was no ribbon cutting, no ceremony, no speeches, no photo ops. Just a quiet Tuesday morning, bird song, and me, kneeling on the lawn with a trowel in one hand and a flamingo in the other. Leonard went back in without protest. Same spot, same slight tilt, beak proudly angled toward the hydrangeas. But this time he wore aviator sunglasses, a flag-themed cape, and a small laminated sign that read, "Still standing." The breeze rustled through the flowers as if welcoming him home, the tiny cape fluttering like a victory flag. The new neighborhood charter was passed last week. It was one page long and contained revolutionary clauses such as live and let live. No one cares about your mulch, and plastic birds are not weapons. I helped draft it, Beverly co-signed. The language committee voted to remove all uses of optics on principle. That night I hosted a barbecue, nothing fancy, hot dogs, coleslaw, lemonade in mason jars. The air was thick with the scent of charcoal and sweet barbecue sauce, children's laughter punctuated by the hiss of the grill. Leonard stood proudly by the grill, sunglasses reflecting the string lights overhead. Someone brought cupcakes shaped like garden gnomes, while someone else made tiny paper picket signs with phrases like "Flamingo Forever" and "HOA," happily out of authority. Even Gerald showed up, late, of course. He said he was just passing by, but lingered by the cooler and didn't flinch when I handed him a drink. He stayed on the edge of the circle at first, the flicker of string lights catching the unease in his eyes. We didn't talk much, just exchanged a nod. Gerald looked tired, quieter, impossibly human. One doesn't argue with progress. As the sun set, kids chased each other through the grass, neighbors laughed, music played low from someone's Bluetooth speaker, and for the first time in years, no one complained about a lawn chair being 2 inches out of alignment. Peace, as it turns out, is a flamingo-shaped thing. I sat back, plate in hand, drink in the other. I watched Leonard sway gently in the breeze, and I thought about power. Some men build empires, some men destroy them. Me? I just wanted my damn lawn back. Original heartwarming fiction every week. Subscribe for your next great story.